Have you ever looked at someone and decided you knew their whole story? Judged them by the uniform they wore, the tired look in their eyes, or the way they hurried past, invisible? We all do it. We draw lines between us and them, the server and the served, the seen and the unseen. But what if the person you dismissed with a glance, the one you assumed was powerless, was actually the one holding all the cards? What if the quiet waitress you barely noticed was about to change everything? This is a story about what happens when we dare to look closer. It began in the gleaming, soulless lobby of the Vance Grand Hotel, a place built on a foundation of marble and forgetting. Forgetting the names of the people who polished the floors, who changed the sheets, who served the champagne. For Amelia Vance, it was a place built on the foundation of her father's dream, a dream that had been corrupted into a cold, transactional machine. She, however, was not Amelia Vance today. Today, she was just Anna, a new waitress, her identity tucked away beneath a starched black apron and a name tag that felt like a costume. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a severe, regulation bun, and her expression was a carefully constructed mask of pleasant neutrality. She moved through the five-star hotel's opulent breakfast restaurant, the Solstice Room, with a practiced efficiency that belied her supposed inexperience. She refilled coffee cups with a steady hand, cleared plates with a quiet grace, and absorbed the ambient condescension of the wealthy clientele like a sponge. Her father, the late Arthur Vance, had always said, "A hotel isn't a building, Amelia. It's a feeling. It's the feeling of being cared for, of being truly seen." But as Anna, Amelia felt more invisible than ever, and she saw that the feeling her father cherished was gone, replaced by a brittle veneer of luxury. Her mission was simple, if painful, to live inside the machine her father had built to find out exactly where and why the heart had stopped beating. She was on her third week of this undercover reconnaissance, and the diagnosis was grim. The problem wasn't a single faulty part. It was a rot that had set in at the core. She saw it in the weary eyes of Maria, the head housekeeper, who was forced to manage with a skeleton crew. She heard it in the whispers of the bellhops, who were reprimanded for spending too much time talking to guests. And she felt it in the icy demeanor of the man in charge of it all, the general manager, Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a man who worshipped at the altar of the bottom line. He saw guests not as people, but as revenue streams, graded on a scale of profitability. The higher their net worth, the more they mattered. He strode through the hotel like a minor king surveying a kingdom he found slightly disappointing, his smile reserved only for those with platinum credit cards. Amelia watched him from afar, polishing silverware behind a service stand. He would glide up to a table of hedge fund managers, his voice a smooth, reassuring purr, offering them complimentary aged whiskey. Moments later, he would corner a young busboy in a corridor, his voice a venomous hiss, berating him for using 2 sugar packets instead of 1 in a guest's coffee. He was the embodiment of the hotel's sickness, a focus on the performance of hospitality rather than the genuine article. Amelia's hands, though steady in her duties, often clenched into fists inside her apron pockets. Every dismissive wave from a guest, every clipped order, every time she was looked through as if she were part of the furniture, she filed it away. These were not personal insults. They were data points in her investigation. They were symptoms of the disease. The staff felt it too. There was no camaraderie, only a shared, simmering resentment. They moved with a hurried, fearful energy, constantly looking over their shoulders for Marcus or one of his exacting supervisors. The joy was gone. The pride her father had instilled in his employees, the idea that they were all hosts in a grand home, had been systematically dismantled and replaced with fear. Amelia knew she couldn't fix it from her father's empty boardroom, staring at spreadsheets. Spreadsheets couldn't tell you the story of a strained smile or the palpable relief of a shift ending. To understand the problem, she had to become the problem's primary victim, an anonymous, low-level employee. She had to feel the ache in her feet after a 12-hour shift. She had to endure the sting of being treated as less than. She had to become invisible to learn how to make everyone feel seen again. Her moment of truth, the catalyst for the storm she knew she would have to unleash, was about to walk through the door. But first, she had to navigate the treacherous waters of the morning rush, a battlefield of demanding patrons and the watchful, critical eyes of Marcus Thorne. One particular guest, a woman named Clarissa Sterling, had become Amelia's personal case study in entitled arrogance. Mrs. Sterling was a regular, a term the staff used with the same dread a sailor might use for typhoon. She was a woman draped in designer labels and a permanent scowl, who believed her frequent patronage entitled her to treat the staff as her personal servants. She was Marcus Thorne's ideal customer, wealthy, demanding, and a vocal reviewer on luxury travel sites. To him, her satisfaction was worth more than the dignity of his entire staff combined. Amelia was assigned to her section this morning. As she approached the table with a pitcher of ice water, Mrs. Sterling didn't even look up from her phone. She simply flapped a hand dismissively. "I'll have my usual. And tell the chef if the egg white frittata is even remotely brown this time, I'll be sending it back. And my grapefruit juice must be freshly squeezed. Not from a carton. I can tell the difference, you know." She said it all to her phone screen, as if Amelia were a voice-activated ordering system. "Of course, Mrs. Sterling," Amelia replied, her voice even and professional, betraying none of the frustration simmering beneath the surface. She retreated to the kitchen, the cold weight of her mission settling heavily in her chest. It was worse than she thought. Her father's legacy wasn't just fading, it was being actively erased, one entitled guest and one cowardly manager at a time. And she, the silent, invisible waitress, was the only one who could bring it back. The question was no longer what was wrong, but how she would find the strength to make it right. Marcus Thorne was a man sculpted from ambition and tailored suits. He believed success was a simple equation: maximize profit, minimize cost, and maintain an illusion of flawless luxury. People, whether staff or guests, were variables to be managed. His morning staff briefings were less about motivation and more about intimidation. He stood before the bleary-eyed team of waiters, busboys, and hosts, his posture ramrod straight, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of weakness. "Let me be clear," he began, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the empty dining room. "Our numbers were good last quarter. Very good. But good is the enemy of great. I see sloppiness. I see inefficiency. A waiter taking 30 seconds too long to clear a table. A hostess who smiles but doesn't sparkle. These are the details that separate a 5-star establishment from a glorified roadside motel." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. Amelia, standing in the back, felt the collective tension of the room. This wasn't leadership, it was management by fear. "We have guests like Mrs. Sterling," Marcus continued, his tone shifting to one of reverence, "who spend more in one weekend than most of you make in a year. They are not paying for a meal. They are paying for an experience. An experience of perfection. Your job is to provide that perfection. Your personal problems, your fatigue, your feelings, leave them at home. Here, you are an instrument of the Vance Grand brand. Nothing more." Amelia's jaw tightened. Her father had always said the staff were the soul of the brand, not its instruments. They were the artists, not the paintbrushes. Marcus saw them as cogs in a machine, easily replaceable. It was a philosophy that was efficient, profitable, and utterly devoid of humanity. This philosophy was on full display with Clarissa Sterling. When Amelia delivered the frittata, made to the chef's exacting specifications, Clarissa inspected it as if it were a flawed diamond. She poked it with her fork, sniffed it, and then sighed with theatrical disappointment. "It's acceptable," she conceded, without making eye contact. "But the juice." She took a delicate sip of the freshly squeezed grapefruit juice. "There's pulp. I specifically requested no pulp." Amelia knew for a fact this was untrue. It was a power play, a small way to assert her dominance. "My apologies, Mrs. Sterling. I will have it strained for you immediately," Amelia said, maintaining her composure. As she turned to leave, she caught Marcus's eye from across the room. He gave her a look of pure venom, a silent message that she had failed, that she had allowed a crack to appear in the veneer of perfection. He was already gliding towards Clarissa's table, his face a mask of profound apology. "Mrs. Sterling, I am so terribly sorry," he oozed. "There is no excuse for this oversight. Please, allow me to personally oversee the preparation of a new juice for you. And of course, your entire breakfast will be complimentary." Clarissa preened under the attention. "Well, thank you, Marcus. It's just so hard to find good help these days." Her eyes flickered towards Amelia, a flicker of cold triumph. This was the system Marcus had built, one where the staff were always wrong and the wealthy guest was always right, no matter how unreasonable. It was a system that rewarded bullies and punished the diligent. Later that day, Amelia witnessed another side of Marcus's management style. In the staff break room, a young busboy named Leo was close to tears. His mother was ill, and he had asked for an unpaid day off to take her to a doctor's appointment. Marcus had denied the request. "We are short-staffed, Leo," Marcus had told him, his voice devoid of sympathy. "Your family matters are your own. The hotel has needs. If you cannot meet them, I can find a dozen people who can by lunchtime." Leo was now staring at his phone, his face a portrait of despair. The other staff members offered quiet words of support, but they all knew the score. They were all just one family emergency, one sick day, one mistake away from being replaced. Amelia sat down opposite Leo, her Anna persona softening for a moment. "I'm sorry, Leo," she said softly. "That's incredibly unfair." Leo looked up, surprised that one of his colleagues was speaking so openly. "He doesn't care," Leo mumbled, wiping his eyes. "None of them do. We're just bodies. To them, this place runs on money. But it runs on us. On our backs, on our tired feet." Amelia knew he was right. She had seen the budget reports. She knew Marcus had slashed overtime, cut benefits, and frozen wages, all while boasting about record profits to the board. He was squeezing every last drop of life out of his employees to inflate his numbers, presenting himself as a managerial genius. The illusion of luxury was being paid for by the silent suffering of people like Leo. The hotel was a beautiful, gilded cage, and she was beginning to understand that both the staff and the guests were trapped inside it in different ways. The staff were trapped by economic necessity, and the guests were trapped by the hollow promise that money could buy genuine happiness and respect. It was all a lie, a magnificent, expensive, and deeply cynical lie. And Marcus Thorne was its chief architect. That afternoon, as the lunch service was winding down, a man and a little girl walked through the grand entrance. They were not the usual clientele. The man's suit, though clean, was slightly frayed at the cuffs. His shoulders were slumped with a weariness that had nothing to do with a long flight in first class. The little girl, clutching a well-loved teddy bear, looked around the cavernous lobby with wide, intimidated eyes. They were a small, fragile vessel in an ocean of opulence, and Amelia felt an immediate, protective instinct. She didn't know it yet, but the hotel's redemption, and her own, had just checked in. David Chin felt as out of place as a sparrow in an eagle's nest. The Vance Grand's lobby was designed to intimidate, to awe, to make one feel small in the face of such overwhelming wealth. The ceilings were impossibly high, a crystal chandelier the size of a car dripped light onto the polished marble floors, and the air itself seemed to smell of money. He clutched his daughter Lily's small hand, his own palms sweating. Everything depended on tomorrow. The job interview he had flown across the country for wasn't just a career move, it was a lifeline. After his wife had passed away 2 years ago, he'd been treading water, working a dead-end job, barely making ends meet, and trying to be both a father and a mother to his 6-year-old daughter. This interview, with a top engineering firm downtown, was his one shot at giving Lily the stable, secure life she deserved. He had spent nearly all of his savings on the plane tickets, and this one-night stay at the hotel, chosen because it was the closest to the interview location. He had hoped the proximity would give him a calm, focused morning. Instead, the sheer grandeur of the place was making his anxiety skyrocket. He felt like an imposter, and he worried it showed. As he approached the check-in desk, the receptionist gave him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her gaze flickered from his worn suitcase to his off-the-rack suit. David felt a familiar flush of shame. He was being weighed and measured, and he knew he was coming up short in their silent calculus of worth. After a sterile and efficient check-in, he and Lily made their way to the solstice room for an early dinner. Lily was quiet, overwhelmed by the hushed, formal atmosphere. She clutched her bear, Bartholomew, as if he were a shield. David's heart ached for her. This was all too much, too strange. He just wanted a simple, warm meal to settle their nerves. The hostess led them to a small table in a corner, a location that felt more like an act of quarantine than hospitality. It was then that Amelia, or Anna, approached their table. She arrived with 2 glasses of water and a small, genuine smile. Unlike the receptionist, her eyes were kind. She didn't look at his suit or his luggage. She looked at him, and then she looked at Lily. "Hello there," Amelia said softly, crouching down slightly to be on Lily's level. "And who is this handsome fellow?" She gestured to the teddy bear. Lily, who usually shied away from strangers, held Bartholomew up. "This is Bartholomew," she whispered. "He's a very brave explorer." Amelia's smile widened. "I can see that. It's a pleasure to meet you, Bartholomew. My name is Anna. Is there anything special an explorer like you would like to drink? Perhaps some apple juice in a fancy glass?" Lily's eyes lit up. She nodded shyly. David felt a wave of relief wash over him. This woman, this waitress, had done more in 30 seconds to make them feel welcome than anyone else in the entire, imposing hotel. She saw not a financial liability in a cheap suit, but a father and his daughter. When Amelia returned with the menus and Lily's apple juice, she treated them with the same quiet dignity and attentiveness she would have offered a CEO. She was patient as David scanned the prices, his brow furrowed with worry. She gently recommended the shepherd's pie, mentioning it was hearty and comforting, one of my favorites, subtly steering him towards one of the more affordable, yet delicious, options on the menu. Throughout the meal, David watched her. He saw how she moved, how she anticipated needs, how she maintained an aura of calm even as the dinner rush began to swell around them. He also saw how others treated her. A man at a nearby table snapped his fingers to get her attention. Another complained that his steak, ordered medium rare, was a shade too close to medium. And through it all, she was a portrait of grace. This small island of kindness in a sea of arrogance was not lost on David. He had spent the last 2 years feeling judged and overlooked by the world. He knew what it felt like to be invisible. In Anna, he recognized a fellow traveler in the land of the unseen, and he felt a quiet kinship with her. When the meal was over and he was signing the check, adding a tip that was more generous than he could really afford, he looked up at her. "Thank you, Anna," he said, his voice full of sincere gratitude. "That was the best meal I've had in a long time." Amelia met his gaze. "It was my pleasure, David," she said, using his name, which she had remembered from the reservation slip. It was a small detail, but it mattered. It was a confirmation that he was a person, not just a table number. As David and Lily left the restaurant, Lily turned and gave Amelia a small wave. Amelia waved back, a real, unguarded smile finally breaking through her professional facade. In that moment, Amelia's resolve hardened. This was what her father's hotel was supposed to be. It was for people like David and Lily. People who deserved comfort, dignity, and a moment of peace. It wasn't for the Clarissa Sterlings or the finger-snappers of the world. David Chin, the struggling single father with the worn-out suit, had just become the new cornerstone of her mission. He was the guest she would fight for. He had reminded her not just of what the hotel had lost, but of everything it was worth fighting to regain. The battle lines were now clearly drawn in her mind. On one side stood Marcus Thorne and his cold, profitable machine. On the other, a father and daughter who just needed a little bit of kindness. Amelia knew which side she was on. The next morning, the storm arrived in the form of Clarissa Sterling and her breakfast order. It was the moment that would shatter the fragile peace and set the final confrontation in motion. Clarissa swept into the solstice room like a minor monarch, expecting the world to rearrange itself around her. She chose the best table, the one with the panoramic view of the city, and did not wait to be seated. Amelia, once again in her section, approached with a practiced calm she did not feel. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling," she began. Clarissa cut her off with an imperious wave of her hand, her diamond bracelets clattering. "Don't good morning me. Just get me my coffee. Black. And a croissant. Not one of your sad, doughy American ones. A proper French croissant. Flaky. Buttery. If I bite into it, and it doesn't shatter into 1,000 tiny pieces, you'll be taking it back." Amelia nodded, her expression unreadable. "Of course." She returned minutes later with the coffee and a croissant the pastry chef had personally selected as his finest of the morning. Clarissa subjected it to a withering inspection before taking a small, critical bite. A few delicate flakes fell onto the pristine white plate. "Humph, barely adequate," she declared, though she proceeded to eat the entire thing. Then came the main event. "I'm feeling creative today," Clarissa announced, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the menu. "I want an omelette. But I don't want any of these pedestrian fillings. I want smoked salmon, a touch of creme fraiche, and exactly 7 capers. Not 6, not 8. 7. And I want the eggs whipped, but not frothy. Do you understand the difference?" Amelia understood perfectly. This wasn't a food order, it was a test. A game of power designed to be failed. "I will pass your specific instructions to the chef, Mrs. Sterling," she said. In the kitchen, the chef rolled his eyes. 7 capers? Is she kidding me? He muttered, but he complied. He was a professional, but he was also exhausted by the constant, unreasonable demands that management forced him to entertain. Amelia brought the omelette to the table, placing it before Clarissa with a steady hand. For a moment there was silence. Clarissa stared at the plate. Then she picked up her fork and surgically dissected the omelette, searching for a flaw. She found one. "Is this chives?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain as she pointed to a microscopic green speck. "I didn't ask for chives." A tiny sliver of chive had likely fallen from a neighboring prep station. It was an infinitesimal error, one that 999 out of 1,000 people would never have noticed or cared about. But for Clarissa, it was a declaration of war. "This is completely unacceptable," she said, her voice rising in volume, attracting the attention of nearby tables. David, Chin, and Lily, seated a few tables away, looked over, their expressions concerned. "I gave you simple, clear instructions. Is it really that difficult to follow them? Or are you just incompetent?" And then it happened. The gesture that sealed Marcus Thorne's fate. Clarissa Sterling looked directly at Amelia, her face a mask of contempt, and she rolled her eyes. It was a slow, deliberate, dramatic roll, a theatrical expression of utter disgust. It was a gesture that said, "You are nothing. You are a bug on my shoe." She then pushed the plate away. "Just get me the manager," she snapped. "I need to speak with someone who actually knows what they're doing." The humiliation was public and profound. Amelia stood frozen for a second, the heat of a dozen pairs of eyes on her. She felt the sting, not just for herself, but for every server, every cleaner, every bellhop who had ever been treated this way. She saw Marcus Thorne already moving towards them from across the room, his face a carefully arranged symphony of concern for Clarissa and fury for Amelia. He arrived at the table, bowing slightly to Clarissa. "Mrs. Sterling, what seems to be the problem? I am so sorry for whatever my staff has done." He didn't even ask for Amelia's side of the story. He didn't need to. In his world, she was already guilty. "The problem, Marcus," Clarissa said, pointing a finger at Amelia, "is her. She's ruined my breakfast. She's ruined my morning. I come here for a certain standard of service, and this is not it." Marcus turned his cold gaze on Amelia. His voice was low, but it carried across the silent restaurant. "Anna, apologize to Mrs. Sterling. Now." Amelia looked from Marcus's furious face to Clarissa's smug one. She could apologize. She could play the game, endure the humiliation, and file it away with all the other data points. But something inside her snapped. The part of her that was her father's daughter could not remain silent. Mrs. Sterling's omelet contained a speck of chive she did not request. Amelia stated, her voice clear and steady, devoid of apology. For that, the kitchen is sorry. However, my service was professional and precise at all times. Marcus's eyes widened in disbelief at her defiance. Clarissa gasped, scandalized. How dare you? You are to apologize for your attitude. Marcus hissed, stepping closer to her. Not for the chive. For your insolence. Amelia held his gaze. I will not apologize for being treated with disrespect. The dining room was utterly silent. The tension was thick enough to taste. Marcus Thorne looked as if he was about to explode. He pointed a trembling finger toward the kitchen. You are finished. Get out of my sight. We will discuss your termination immediately after I have rectified this situation. Amelia gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She turned and walked away from the table, her back straight, her head held high. She didn't look at David, but she could feel his eyes on her, a look not of pity, but of admiration. As she pushed through the kitchen doors, she knew the time for observation was over. The time for action had begun. Marcus Thorne had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He had tried to break a waitress named Anna, not knowing he was declaring war on Amelia Vance. David had watched the entire exchange with a knot in his stomach. He had seen the way Mrs. Sterling had treated Anna from the beginning, her condescension a poison that tainted the air. He had seen Anna's quiet professionalism, her refusal to be baited. And he had seen the final, ugly confrontation. The public humiliation, the manager's immediate betrayal of his own staff member, it all felt deeply, personally wrong. He wanted to say something, to stand up and defend her, but he was paralyzed by his own precarious situation. He couldn't afford to cause a scene. His interview, his future, Lily's future, it all hung in the balance. But his silence felt like a form of cowardice, and it ate at him. Later that morning, as he was walking down a corridor on the way back to his room, he saw her. Anna was standing by a service elevator, her back to him, her shoulders slumped. The defiant posture she had worn in the dining room was gone, replaced by a quiet dejection. He knew he couldn't just walk by. He approached her softly. Excuse me, Anna? She turned startled. Her face was composed, but he could see the strain in her eyes. I just wanted to say. I saw what happened back there, David said, his voice earnest. And I think you handled that with incredible grace. You were a complete professional. That woman and your manager, they were out of line. Completely. Amelia looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, her Anna mask slipped entirely. A flicker of genuine, weary gratitude showed through. Thank you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. That means a lot. Don't let people like that get to you. David continued, feeling a surge of conviction. They're not worth your energy. You're good at what you do. You're one of the kindest, most attentive people I've met. It was a simple, heartfelt compliment, but for Amelia, it landed with the force of a revelation. In the past 3 weeks, she had been treated as an object, a function, a problem. David was the first guest to see her as a person. His words were a balm on the wound of the morning's humiliation, but they were also fuel. They reaffirmed everything she was fighting for. He was the reason. People like him were the entire point of a place like this. Her mission, which had felt academic and strategic, suddenly became intensely personal. She wasn't just fixing a company, she was fighting for the dignity of her staff and the comfort of good, decent people like David Chin. I appreciate that more than you know, she told him, her voice stronger now. Good luck with whatever brings you to the city, a job interview, he admitted, a nervous energy returning to him. A big one. Tomorrow morning. Well, Amelia said, a hint of her true authority seeping into her tone. I have a feeling you're going to do great. As they parted ways, Amelia's mind was racing. David's kindness had solidified her resolve. She spent the rest of the day with her eyes wide open, not just as a manager assessing problems, but as a human being feeling the effects of them. She saw a maid trying to scrub a stubborn stain from a carpet, her knees aching, because Marcus had refused to approve the budget for a new steam cleaner. She saw the concierge, a man who spoke 5 languages fluently, forced to upsell guests on overpriced tour packages he knew were a rip-off. She tasted the orange juice at the breakfast buffet, which she now realized was a cheap concentrate, a cost-cutting measure that saved pennies while sacrificing quality. Every detail was a fresh indictment of Marcus Thorne's regime. He was running the hotel like a sweatshop with a marble facade. That evening, as she was finishing her shift, she walked past David's room. The door was slightly ajar, and she heard a sound that made her stop in her tracks, the sound of a child crying, followed by David's panicked, hushed voice on the phone. The quiet dignity he had projected was gone, replaced by raw fear. This was the crisis, the unexpected variable that could derail a life. And Amelia knew, with absolute certainty, that her time as a passive observer was officially over. She could not stand by and watch this good man's one chance at a better life slip away because of a sick child in a hotel with no heart. The Vance Grand was about to get a lesson in what genuine hospitality truly meant. Amelia pushed the door to David's room open a little further. "Excuse me? Is everything all right?" she asked softly, her voice full of a concern that was no longer part of an act. David was pacing the length of the small room, his phone pressed to his ear, his face pale with stress. Lily was curled up on the bed, wrapped in a duvet, her face flushed with fever, her small whimpers cutting through the air. He ended the call abruptly, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "It's my daughter, Lily," he said, his voice cracking. "She has a fever." It came on so fast. "I was just on the phone with a 24-hour nurse line, but I can't leave her. I can't possibly leave her alone tomorrow." The full weight of his predicament crashed down on Amelia. His life-changing interview was in less than 12 hours. He was in a strange city with no friends, no family, and a sick child. The desperation in his eyes was palpable. "My interview is at 9 a.m., he said, more to himself than to her. "I have to cancel. There's no other way. I can't." His voice trailed off as he looked at his sleeping, feverish daughter, his expression a mixture of fierce love and utter despair. This was it. This was the moment that defined a company's character. Would the Vance Grand be a cold, impersonal building where a man's hopes were dashed by bad luck? Or would it be what her father had always intended it to be, a place of refuge, a place that cared? Amelia stepped fully into the room, her Anna persona replaced by a quiet, commanding competence. "You're not going to cancel anything," she stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. David looked at her, confused. "But what can I do? I don't know anyone here. I can't afford a last-minute babysitter, and I wouldn't trust a stranger with her anyway, especially when she's sick. Let me handle it," Amelia said. She wasn't asking, she was informing. For a moment, David hesitated. She was just a waitress, one who was probably about to be fired. What could she possibly do? But there was something in her eyes, a depth of certainty, a calm authority, that made him trust her. He was out of options, and this kind stranger was offering him a sliver of hope. He simply nodded, too exhausted and worried to argue. Amelia immediately went into action. Her first call wasn't to the concierge or the front desk. It was to a private number on her cell phone. "Dr. Evans, it's Amelia Vance. I'm at the Grand on 5th. I have a guest with a sick child in room 712. I need you here in 20 minutes. Yes, it's an emergency." The doctor on the other end, the hotel's longtime on-call physician for VIPs, didn't question her. He simply said, "I'm on my way." Next, she accessed the hotel's employee database on her phone, bypassing the public interface and going straight to the core files. She scrolled through the profiles of the staff who worked at the hotel's daycare center, a high-end service for wealthy families that Marcus had been trying to downsize, calling it an underutilized asset. She found what she was looking for, a caregiver named Elena, a woman with a decade of experience, impeccable references, and a degree in early childhood education. A note in her file, written by the previous general manager, read, "The most trustworthy and compassionate person in this entire hotel." Amelia made another call. "Elena? This is Anna from the Solstice Room. I know it's late, but I have a very important guest who needs your help tomorrow morning. It's a bit of an unusual situation, but it's an emergency." She explained the situation, her voice conveying the urgency and importance of the task. Elena, who was being underutilized and given fewer hours by Marcus, readily agreed. Within 15 minutes the doctor arrived, discreet and professional. He examined Lily, diagnosed a common childhood virus, and administered a fever reducer, reassuring David that she would be fine with rest. He left behind children's Tylenol and a small vaporizer, all charged to a private account Amelia kept for hotel emergencies. David watched all of this unfold in a daze. A top doctor had appeared as if from nowhere. A solution for tomorrow was being put in place. The waitress, Anna, was moving with the quiet efficiency of a field general, coordinating everything with a few quiet phone calls. Who are you?" David finally asked, his voice filled with awe. Amelia simply smiled. "I'm just someone who believes good people deserve a fair chance," she said, deflecting the question. "Elena will be here at 7 a.m. She is wonderful. You can trust her completely. Now you need to get some rest. You have a big day tomorrow. Focus on your future, David. We'll take care of this." As she left the room, leaving a stunned but profoundly relieved David behind, Amelia felt a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. This was why she was here. It wasn't about profit margins or brand identity. It was about this. It was about leveraging the immense resources of her family's company to perform a simple, powerful act of human kindness. It was about making the hotel a force for good in one person's life. Tomorrow, she would deal with Marcus Thorne and the corporate rot. But tonight she had helped a father and his sick little girl. And in doing so, she had found the soul of the Vance Grand Hotel again, beating quietly in room 712. The next morning, Marcus Thorne stood before his senior staff in the hotel's main conference room, the chairman's hall. He was a portrait of smug satisfaction. The quarterly profit reports were in front of him, and they were, as he had predicted, excellent. He saw himself as a conquering hero, a visionary who had trimmed the fat and guided the Vance Grand to unprecedented financial success. His speech was filled with corporate jargon about synergy, optimization, and brand elevation. He was a man in love with the sound of his own voice. "As you can see," he said, gesturing to a slide with an aggressively upward trending graph, "we have successfully increased our revenue per guest by 12%. This is the result of strategic cost management and a renewed focus on our elite clientele." He paused for effect, his eyes sweeping the room. "However, success breeds complacency. And I will not tolerate complacency. Standards must be upheld. In fact, they must be constantly raised. There is no room for error, no room for weakness, and no room for insubordination." His eyes narrowed, and a cruel smile played on his lips. This was the part he had been looking forward to. The public execution. It was a classic management tactic of his: make an example of one to terrify the rest. "Yesterday, we had an incident," he continued, his voice dripping with faux gravity. "An incident where a staff member, a new waitress, decided that her own judgment was superior to the hotel's core principle of absolute guest satisfaction. She was rude, defiant, and she embarrassed this establishment in front of one of our most valued patrons, Mrs. Sterling." He looked towards the door. "Bring her in." A junior manager scurried out and returned a moment later with Amelia, who was still dressed in her Anna uniform. She walked into the room with a calm that seemed to unnerve Marcus. She didn't look scared or ashamed. She looked patient. She stood before the assembled managers, her hands clasped behind her back. "Anna," Marcus said, savoring the name like a piece of bitter chocolate. Would you care to explain to my management team why you felt it was appropriate to argue with a guest? Amelia met his gaze. I did not argue. I stated a fact. And I refuse to apologize for being treated with disrespect. A gasp went through the room. No one ever spoke to Marcus Thorne like that. His face flushed with anger. Disrespect? Your job is not to worry about your feelings. Your job is to serve. You are a disgrace to this uniform. You have failed to grasp the most basic tenet of the service industry. And for that failure, your employment at the Vance Grand is terminated. Effective immediately. Let this be a lesson to all of you, he said, turning back to his audience. This is what happens when standards slip. This is the weakness I will not tolerate. He pointed a dismissive finger at the door. Now get out. But Amelia didn't move. She simply stood there, a small, knowing smile on her lips. I don't think so, Marcus. Just as he was about to explode in a torrent of rage, the grand double doors of the chairman's hall swung open. In walked a group of men and women in sharp business suits. At their lead was a stern, silver-haired man named Arthur Kensington, the chairman of the board for Vance Hotel Group and Amelia's late father's most trusted friend. The managers in the room shot to their feet, their faces a mixture of confusion and panic. Marcus Thorne froze, his jaw slack. Mr. Kensington! I wasn't expecting you. What is the board doing here? He stammered. Mr. Kensington ignored him. His eyes were fixed on Amelia. He gave her a subtle, supportive nod. And then, Amelia Vance acted. She reached up and calmly unpinned the Anna name tag from her uniform. She unfastened her apron and folded it neatly, placing it on the edge of the conference table. She stood before them all, no longer a waitress, but a woman in complete command. Thank you, Marcus, she said, her voice ringing with an authority that stunned the room into absolute silence. You've just perfectly demonstrated the exact problem I came here to solve. She turned to the bewildered managers and the terrified Marcus Thorne. Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Amelia Vance. I am the majority shareholder and, as of this morning, the acting CEO of Vance Grand Hotels. The collective intake of breath was the only sound in the room. Marcus Thorne's face drained of all color. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. He stared at Amelia, the woman he had just fired, the woman he had publicly humiliated, and saw not a lowly waitress, but the heir to the entire Vance empire. He swayed on his feet, his perfect, profitable world crumbling to dust around him. In the lobby, Clarissa Sterling, who had come down to complain about the temperature of her tea, saw the commotion. She watched, horrified, as the waitress she had scorned the day before stood at the head of the conference table, commanding the attention of the entire board of directors. The eye rolls she had so casually deployed yesterday suddenly felt like the single most expensive mistake of her life. The unseen had just made herself visible. And the reckoning had arrived. Amelia let the shock settle over the room for a long moment, allowing the full weight of the revelation to sink in. Marcus Thorne looked like a man who had forgotten how to breathe. The other managers stared, their minds scrambling to recalibrate everything they thought they knew. Amelia's voice, when she spoke again, was not wrathful or vengeful. It was calm, clear, and filled with the quiet conviction of a leader who knew her purpose. For the past 3 weeks, I have worked alongside you, she began, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the staff. I have served your coffee, cleared your tables, and listened in your break rooms. I did this because I needed to understand what had happened to my father's company. He built this hotel, and this entire chain, on a simple, powerful idea, that genuine hospitality is about making every single person who walks through our doors feel seen, respected, and cared for. Not just the wealthy. Not just the influential. Everyone, she paused, letting her words resonate. But that is not the hotel I have been working in. I have seen a place ruled by fear, not respect. I have seen employees who are overworked, underappreciated, and treated as disposable cogs in a machine. I have seen a culture where the abusive whims of a wealthy guest are valued more than the dignity of a hard-working staff member. Her eyes finally landed on Marcus. He flinched as if struck. You have chased profits at the expense of our principles. You have polished the marble but allowed the soul of this hotel to tarnish. You have created an illusion of luxury that is hollow to its core. This company is not about spreadsheets and profit margins, Marcus. It's about people. A foundation you have forgotten. She turned to the rest of the managers. This ends today. With a newfound energy, she outlined her vision. Effective immediately, all the staff benefits that were cut in the last year are reinstated. The hiring freeze is lifted. We will be investing in new equipment, better supplies, and most importantly in you. We are also implementing a new guest policy. We will, of course, strive for excellence in our service. But we will have a zero-tolerance policy for guests who are abusive to our staff. This is not their home to misbehave in, it is our home, and our staff will be treated with the dignity they deserve. A murmur of approval, of hope, rippled through the room. She then pointed to a veteran hostess named Sarah, a woman who had worked at the hotel for 20 years and was universally loved by her colleagues for her kindness and competence. Sarah, I'm promoting you to Director of Guest Experience. Your first task is to work with the staff to rebuild the culture of this hotel from the ground up. Sarah stared, tears welling in her eyes, speechless. Finally, Amelia turned back to Marcus. As for you, Marcus, she said, her voice firm but devoid of malice, your services are no longer required. Please have your office cleared out within the hour. He opened his mouth to protest, to argue, but he saw the unshakable resolve in her eyes and the silent, stony agreement of Mr. Kensington and the board. He was finished. He simply nodded, a broken man, and turned and walked out of the room, his reign of terror over. Later that afternoon, David Chen returned to the hotel. The interview had been a resounding success. He felt confident, hopeful, and lighter than he had in years. He had gotten the job. His first thought was to find Anna to thank her, to tell her that her incredible act of kindness had made it all possible. He asked for her at the front desk, but the receptionist looked confused. There's no one named Anna working here, sir. Just then, a woman approached him. She was wearing an elegant, tailored business suit, her hair down, her face confident and serene. It took him a moment to recognize her. It was Anna. David, she said, smiling warmly. I was hoping I'd see you. I heard the good news. David was utterly bewildered. Anna? What's going on? You're not in your uniform. She chuckled softly. My name is Amelia Vance, she explained gently. And this is my hotel. I was working undercover. David stared at her, the pieces clicking into place. The doctor. The childcare. The quiet authority. It all made sense now. He was speechless, humbled. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Amelia said. But I have to thank you. In a way, you're the one who made all of this happen. David looked confused. Me? How? You reminded me who we're supposed to be serving, she said, her voice full of genuine emotion. My father didn't build this place for people who think kindness is beneath them. He built it for people like you. A good, decent man trying to build a better life for his daughter. You helped me find the heart of this company again, David. You showed me it was still worth fighting for. In that moment, standing in the grand lobby, the lines between waitress and owner, between struggling father and powerful CEO, dissolved. They were just two people who had, through a simple act of mutual respect, helped change each other's lives for the better. Weeks turned into a month, and the Vance Grand Hotel underwent a quiet but profound transformation. The changes weren't just cosmetic, they were atmospheric. The fear that had once permeated the hallways was replaced by a palpable sense of pride and purpose. Under Sarah's new leadership as Director of Guest Experience, staff morale soared. They were listened to, respected, and empowered. The smiles on their faces were no longer strained or forced. They were genuine. The hotel, once a cold and intimidating palace, began to feel like a warm and welcoming home. The quality of service skyrocketed, not because of threats or pressure, but because the staff genuinely cared again. They took pride in their work, knowing their efforts were appreciated by a leadership that had their back. The new guest policy was tested early on when a wealthy businessman, accustomed to the old way of doing things, began berating a young bellhop over a minor delay. Sarah calmly intervened, informed the man that his behavior was unacceptable, and politely suggested that another hotel might be a better fit for his needs. The staff watched, amazed. The message was clear: their dignity was no longer for sale. Amelia, now fully in her role as CEO, led with a style that blended her father's compassionate vision with her own sharp, modern business sense. She didn't just run the company from a distant boardroom. She was a constant presence in her hotels. She knew the names of the doormen, she had coffee with the housekeeping staff, and she solicited ideas from everyone, from the dishwashers to the department heads. She proved that a business could be both profitable and principled, that treating people well was not just a moral imperative, but the smartest business strategy of all. To celebrate the new era and to thank the man who had unknowingly been its catalyst, Amelia invited David and Lily back to the hotel for a weekend, this time as her personal guests. They arrived to a very different reception. The staff greeted them with genuine warmth, not the feigned politeness of before. David, now confidently settled in his new job, no longer looked like an imposter in the grand lobby. He looked like he belonged. He and Lily were given the presidential suite. Lily, now healthy and vibrant, squealed with delight at the size of the room and the basket of toys Amelia had personally selected for her. Bartholomew the bear sat enthroned on a pile of plush pillows, surveying his new kingdom. That evening, Amelia joined David and Lily for dinner in the solstice room. The atmosphere was lively and happy. The food was exquisite. But the best part, for David, was seeing the staff. He watched as they laughed with each other, as they engaged with guests with an easy confidence. He saw the chef come out of the kitchen to chat with a family at a nearby table. He saw Sarah moving through the room, not as a warden, but as a gracious host. He looked across the table at Amelia, who was enchanting Lily with a story about a brave princess who owned a castle. He saw not a powerful CEO, but a woman who had used her power to create goodness and warmth in the world. "You did it," he said quietly when Lily was distracted by a spectacular dessert. "You really fixed it." Amelia followed his gaze around the room. "We fixed it," she corrected him gently. "It takes a whole family to make a home feel like a home." Later that night, after David and Lily had retired to their suite, Amelia walked to her father's old office, which she had now claimed as her own. It had been redecorated, but his portrait still hung in its place of honor above the fireplace. She stood before it, a glass of water in her hand, looking into the kind, painted eyes of the man who had started it all. The office was quiet, but through the walls she could feel the gentle, rhythmic hum of the hotel, a living, breathing entity, its heart now beating strong and steady once more. She had not just saved a company, she had honored her father's legacy. She had faced the cynicism and cruelty of the world and answered it not with more of the same, but with a radical belief in the power of respect. And she had won. So, let me ask you again. The next time you encounter someone in a uniform, someone serving you, cleaning for you, helping you, what will you see? Will you see the role, the function, the invisible cog in the machine? Or will you see the person? The truth is, we are all one act of kindness away from changing a life, and one act of arrogance away from making a terrible mistake. True worth isn't in a title or a bank account. It's in how we treat one another. The waitress you ignore could be the queen of the castle. Share this story if you believe a little kindness can change everything. And the next time you meet someone, in any walk of life, remember to look past the uniform and see the human being standing before you. You never know whose world you might be about to change.